So this morning we've been given a lot to consider about what collaborations, cooperation, and really ventilating issues with the lens or from the perspective of the South. We continue to have that conversation at this second edition of the Development Forum brought to you by the OPEC Fund, because the world does need new perspectives. It does need us to think global, act local, and really respond to conditions in our own societies in a manner in which is fitting. And so to quote from my home country, South Africa, and my continent, Africa, we have a famous saying that if you want to go fast, you must go alone. It's better just to walk alone. But if you want to go far, you must bring others with you. This is the essence of collaboration, community, and doing things together. And I think in the road leading up to COP27, Egypt really took that mantra on board. They needed to go far. And so they needed to really bring as many global actors into the picture as possible. And it led to that one breakthrough on finally an agreement of funding for loss and damage. Whilst the modalities are being worked out, it couldn't have happened were it not for this idea that we have to pool resources and pool talents. And to that, we really have to credit our next speaker, the Minister for International Cooperation for Egypt, Rania Al-Mashad. She joins us now to talk to us about cooperation and multilateralism. Minister, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning on what is a beautiful Viennese day. And let me say that cooperation, collaboration are definitely so essential and imperative today, despite all the global challenges that sort of push us to be more disengaged. So distinguished panelists, which are going to join us in a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning I would like to express my sincere thanks to OPEC, for the OPEC Fund, for inviting me for the second year to address the forum. And of course, this year in particular, the title with respect to transformative modalities is something that we are all feeling, both at the national level with private sector and also among countries. Our world is going through many transformative spots, and we are on the verge of 2030, the 2030 agenda, which necessitates and calls for intensifying efforts towards focusing more deeply on inclusive development, multi-stakeholder partnerships that foster progress in human capital development and resilience of people living in vulnerable situations. The need for international and also regional collaboration, as well as integrated solutions, are no longer optional, as mentioned, but imperative for inclusive development and sustainable future for all nations. Many of the multifaceted development challenges have widened and diversified and actually pushed us to think about more scope of knowledge, successful practices, especially in emergency situations. The evidence-based policies and demand-driven implementation modalities are needed more than ever to build the structured, integrated solutions and participatory processes that take into account the limited national resources and capacities in different parts around the world. There is no more time to waste, and there is not going to be any other planet that we're going to inhabit. And that's why to cohesively think together in order to design regional projects and programs and apply the innovative implementation modalities that enhance national capacities as well, it is time for us to build together successfully and productive relations in connecting the dots and putting integrated solutions to these problems that we face. Let me look at the regional front because various common challenges, increasing population size, climate change, water scarcity, COP27 was mentioned, I'll speak about that in a bit, but also the road to economically and socially recover from severe implications of epidemics, environmental disasters, is a very long list of challenges, but nonetheless, studies have shown and confirmed that regional integration helps countries overcome divisions that impede the flow of goods, services, capital, people, and ideas. These divisions are constraining economic growth, especially in developing countries, and also divisions between countries create geographies that entail pure infrastructure in efficient policies, and that's why regional integration is to be promoted, not just through physical and institutional infrastructure, but trade, investment, domestic regulations, transport, ICT, energy infrastructure, macroeconomic and financial policy, provision of other public goods, shared natural resources, security, education, and cooperation comes in these areas to be extremely important in order to push different institutional forms. Regional integration can also lead to substantial economic gains as countries think about improving market efficiency, sharing the costs of public goods and large infrastructure projects, decide policy cooperatively and have an anchor to reform, and also have a building block for global integration and reap other non-economic benefits such as peace and security. Let me here now go to COP27 and Egypt as the president of COP. And as was mentioned, we spent the year before November 22 working collaboratively with different stakeholders, multilateral development banks, our bilateral friends, and in the region as well, to try and push the agenda. For us, it was a COP of implementation, and adaptation and resilience were key. And as was mentioned, the historic agreement on loss and damage for the first time in any COP was quite sizable, and also spoke to how cooperation can actually lead to change that as we move into COP28 and onwards, also push this agenda as well. Also, another very important aspect for COP27 for us as we move from pledges to implementation is how country platforms can be a way and a very effective way to push country ownership, but at the same time mobilize the pledges and the finances in order to meet national goals that also meet the global goals. And here I want to mention our Nexus of Water, Food and Energy, Egypt's country platform for the NOWEFI program. NOWEFI, Nexus of Water, Food and Energy, in Arabic means fulfilling pledges. And we're very happy that the platform is a way to engage and draw in investments that are supported by concessional finance. And very soon we'll be also mentioning key results from the NOWEFI program. It includes also debt swaps with Germany, and so there is scope for innovative financing modalities that can be replicated and scaled. Another important work that we've done during COP was the Sharm el-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing, also thinking about operationalizing and how we can push innovative and finance and development finance into countries that need them the most, those that have the high risk. So there are very important operational examples, particularly in adaptation, which sometimes is taken as a faraway aspect of generating profit for the private sector. So these are some of the outcomes that we are very proud of from COP. Nonetheless, multilateral development banks, international financial institutions have a crucial role to play in our global development process, and we're very happy with the different aspects related to MDB reform. There's the World Bank Evolution roadmap that's taking place. Yesterday I was at IFAD addressing the replenishment of the 13th replenishment board. So there's so much happening in that space, and also it's very, very important that the process is inclusive, includes the voices of the countries that use these finances, and one of the key aspects is also engaging private sector more, because our development agenda can only be met if all hands are on deck. And here we're talking the MDBs, the governments, the private sector, and most recently, of course, philanthropy in a more streamlined and structured way. Let me also mention that South-South cooperation is extremely important. And given the work here, we're at OPEC Fund, the work that this institution is doing and other institutions are doing in projects that address climate, that address resilience, that address small and medium enterprises. One can go on a very long list of impactful projects, and it's very, very important that when successful examples do exist, we shed the light on them and we try to see how we can scale them in other countries. And here comes the concept of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, which we are also, as Egypt, pushing forward as head of NEPAD. We have the presidency, so this is also a way to push South-South cooperation within the African continent. I know that my time is limited, so let me conclude conclude by saying again and emphasizing that in order to maintain the current momentum and not to let the current geopolitical situation around us affect moving from pledges to implementation. We cannot do this on our own. Each one of us here, I'm talking about the different stakeholders, be it governments, private sector, MDBs, and all of us have to work absolutely together in order to develop, to aggregate, to scale up regional investments in the global south towards climate as well as sustainable development. And this is a lifelong journey of continuous partnership, and I believe that the OPIC Fund for International Development is well equipped for this, and I want to congratulate them for a very successful year, and also for the work that the regional group has been doing, given their announcement in Sharm el-Sheikh, several billions of dollars that is also designed to push climate action in different countries. Thank you very much, and as I always conclude, let's Nowafi together, let's fulfill our promises together. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank everybody to join me here on stage. And of course, I would like to thank Her Excellency, the Minister for International Cooperation, Rania, for this excellent introduction. I think very inspiring for us, giving us additional food for thought for our panel this morning. And please allow me as well to thank the OPEC Fund, in particular, His Excellency Dr. Al Khalifa, for the invitation. It's my second panel. Last year was the first forum. It was a great success, and I'm very impressed, and I am pretty sure all the other colleagues are as well. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, we heard it a lot in this morning, how much the economy is under pressure, that we have to think about how to deliver on the just transition, on net zero, on all the SDGs. And I think I don't have to tell you how difficult the times are. Multipolarity, fragmentation, institutional inertia. So we need good solutions. We need regional collaboration. We need scalable solutions. We need catalysts, and that's exactly what we are discussing here this morning. And what we will discuss is, we will discuss how to better coordinate that regional engagement between the governments and multilateral institutions, and of course, the private sector. And we will also think about how we can replicate, how we can scale up development solutions. And we will think about how to pool competitive advantages. So you see, we have a lot of very challenging questions, and I could ask you, I mean, I'm a blunt German professor, and also have a second academic home at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. So I could ask, for example, how I do it with the students, my dear friend, engineer Hani Sonbol from ITFC. Hani, what is your answer? But of course, Hani, my dear friend, I will not. I have 5 panelists, and I would like to introduce them, because sitting next to me is Suzanne Gabri, the Director General for ADB's Private Sector Operations Department, joining us today from Manila. Thank you very much. Welcome. You allowed me to be very short because we have more time to discuss content then.
Absolutely.
Then we have next to Suzanne Ferit Belhaj, Vice President, MENA region with the World Bank since 2018. Welcome as well. Another colleague joining us from the United States, arrived from New York, Dima Al-Khatib, the Director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation since 2023. Very warm welcome. I can say good morning still, or good afternoon. We are at 12:04 to be precise. Perames Vuti-Tornitirax. And Perames is the president of the neighboring country's Economic Development Cooperation Agency, NEDA. And last but not least, I'm very delighted to say hello in person now to Dante Mossi, the executive president of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. So I kicked off regarding the challenges that we live, of course, in a world of polycrisis. And we must address all these regional challenges, not as single countries, but we really have to think about collaborative action. Dima, my first question goes to you. So let's very briefly speak about the most pressing development challenges, just to have the picture here. But of course also then answer the question like how to leverage South-South cooperation, and of course triangular cooperation as well, Dima.
Thank you very much, and thank you for OPEC Fund
for international development for organizing this very important forum. I believe, and thank you for that very good question. And the previous speakers have really elaborated a lot on the different challenges that are being faced. I want to stress few of them, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19. Mostly the socio-economic challenges that the countries of the South are grappling with, but also the financial aspects. And the development finance was quite discussed previously. This is extremely important. This is very much what the member states that have been expressing recently during our high-level committee on South-South cooperation. And it's very much at the heart of the different reports that we have been analyzing and putting forward. So basically, socioeconomic implications, gender disparities has been widening, the impacts of climate change, because this has to do with the resilience of the countries to address them. After the pandemic, the question of health resilience is a key element, how to build resilience institutionally in preparation for any forthcoming pandemic or any other disasters of that scale. But also what's important is also to look at the most affected groups and where are the entry points for the opportunities? What is it there to leverage, right? The power of the youth is something that we need to think about in the countries of the South. Regional collaboration, of course, integration, institutional strengthening has been coming out as a key area of support, and the engagement of civil society, private sector, development banks have been, more and more needed, not only in terms of financial support and contribution, but also in terms of bringing innovation to the table, bringing science, technology, and all of these elements that are extremely important. So this is in a nutshell. And we, as an office, we're trying to see how we can reinforce the establishment of those knowledge platforms, building capacities, but also to convey the voices of the South and bringing them to the table. I'll stop it here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dima. I think that was very, very good and very comprehensive. Ferit, Dima mentioned the different entry points of opportunities. She mentioned also the new ways of thinking, and I think that's the perfect opportunity to very briefly speak about the new roadmap, the new strategy of the World Bank Group, and how to efficiently translate the sustainable development policies into a very concrete action. And maybe we look at that from a regional collaboration perspective.
Thank you, Andreas. And you said that you were a very blunt professor. Let me be a very blunt vice president for the Middle East and North Africa for the World Bank. We are putting lots of money into all of these issues, but we are nowhere near what is needed. This is why when we talk about this evolution roadmap that everybody is looking at right now, when the new president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, is talking about his mission statement, that is fighting poverty, with very much vigor and affirmative action, but at the same time fighting it within the livable planet. When we put that together, what are we looking at? And I'm looking at, if I may, my region, the Middle East and North Africa. Big challenge we have. By 2050, we'll be looking at 300 million young people knocking at the door of the job market in the Middle East and North Africa. 300 million young people, which is more or less the population of the Middle East and North Africa today. These young people will not find a job in the public sector. They will only find a job in the private sector, and the private sector in our region is not developed. We are not putting together the platform that would allow for more private enterprise to thrive. This is something that is really, really preoccupying all of us. When you look at this poly-crisis that you mentioned, you're absolutely right. There is a poly-crisis right now, didn't start today, it's been there for quite some time, and it's been exacerbated by a cascade of shocks that came and that really shook up the whole world. And frankly, in our region, we have this kind of tendency of seeing things coming without taking drastic action. Well, we thought that the health system in our region was okay. But the pandemic came and shook up the whole thing, and we were alerted to the fact that we were far from being okay. Same thing when it comes to the situation with food, for instance. Things were kind of okay, and we were very happy to be basically hooked to one market. When the situation and the war on Ukraine started, we found ourselves in a situation where we were running to find something, to help our people. Now, we have situations related to climate. We have desertification in our region. We have coastal erosion in our region. We have water scarcity in our region. Are we doing enough? I'm not sure we're doing enough. Not because we don't want to do enough, but because, one, there is, frankly, I believe, not enough realization from our policymaker that things have to move fast. Second, because money is not there, not as much as we should be having it. And this is where scaling up and putting more money into these agendas is very important. Let me finish with one word. The World Bank this year delivered more than $72 billion into development, out of which $32 billion for climate. The Middle East and North Africa region alone delivered more than $5.5 billion for the region, out of which 38% for climate. So we are there, but you know what? The delta between where we are and what is needed is extremely, extremely wide. One last word, because I would be remiss if I don't thank Abdelhamid and his team for having done an amazing job in putting this together and to allowing me to put all of these issues in a provocative way to you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And that was exactly what I was looking for. So the delta is too large. Youth entrepreneurship, climate, water scarcity, food insecurity, and a lack of capacity, a lack of financial capacity. I mean, those were key points. You have much more, but it's the perfect question for Suzanne, because the question I have to you is, I mean, how can MDBs such as ADB promote the catalytic finance facilities in this context? How can you crowd in? How can you mobilize more? What are the innovative solutions to exactly come to a point, what we just heard, where we can try to find solutions and create the impact?
Thank you very much. And a lot of gauntlets being thrown down here, and I said I just wanted to thank you for being here. Climate, sustainability, looking for solutions, these are all within the crosshairs that we're looking at. So one of the things that we're trying to do at ADB is to focus on sustainability, looking at climate in Asia and the Pacific. And what we have in place right now, we have climate targets of about 100 billion that we're supposed to be providing from our own resources between 2019 and 2030. Of that, 12 billion is to come from the private sector, which I look after within Asia and the Pacific, and then to mobilize an additional 18 to 30 billion. So those are some really big numbers, and I think that you can't do that unless you have partnerships. And I think that that's one of the keys that we're really looking for across our development partners here, our private sector partners, and we have many topics that we've been trying to discuss about that, not only now, but through, it's a very active week, I know before summer, many of these discussions are taking place, but how can we scale climate? How can we scale on gender? How can we scale on all these different things? And I think that, providing opportunities, working together, providing solutions, creating platforms, and then through that, you like to think of yourself as a bank with a heart. And everything has to have additionality, everything has to have impact. So it's not only about providing market solutions and meeting market gaps and closing market gaps, but it's also providing the platforms in many of these countries to do that. Maybe what I can do is I have one example. I know we're time constrained, but one example. So as talking about the South-South, different solutions. So one of the things that we've done recently, we signed a very large transaction between Laos, where it was a big power project, monsoon wind power, and basically it's a 600 megawatt power plant where the power is being produced in Laos and then evacuated out to Vietnam. So looking at a cross-border type solution, again, renewable energy, providing solutions, providing jobs, and basically we tried to make it a win-win scenario for Vietnam and Laos. I think that is, where you try and involve different parties within that. Of course, bringing in gender, they have gender targets, trying to encourage development of those areas, and trying to create a gender tailored opportunity so you can actually make it, once again, a win-win scenario for the people on the ground, as well as the actual objectives that they're trying to achieve. So that's one example, but I have others, but I'm sure we're going to be talking about more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we love examples because I think that's exactly what we can learn from. And that's the reason why I'm asking Dante a similar question. I mean, I can ask you not only about examples from your region, which I would do. I mean, you have a PhD in economics, so I can ask you other smart questions as well, which means, like, can you somehow elaborate, like, what are the main factors which makes regional collaboration successful?
Thank you. Central America is actually, has the advantage the countries are middle income and very similar somehow. So in a way, having regional projects makes a lot of sense. But the example I want to mention here is during the pandemic. I mean, the countries shut down. There was no flights, and the countries were shutting down. And how do you provide for income for people who are staying at home? So CABEI came out with a $4 billion program and, that included private sector, public sector. And we called friends, and actually, so thank you, because the OPEC fund was one of those friends who, from really far away with their own problems, they actually came to help. And we also had help from countries in Asia, Korea, Taiwan, in the US, USDFC, UN Women. So we created this partnership that actually involved central governments, local governments, private sector. But what I wanted to kind of focus is that, it's the same problem. I mean, migration, poverty, small and medium enterprise, gender inclusion. These are problems that do not respect borders. So having the same approach to the same issues, regardless of the country, it actually makes sense, and you can scale it up very fast. So we actually came back with a second package, the after-pandemic stimulus package. And that was pretty strong on helping the MSMEs, the medium and small enterprises. And most of these businesses were led by women, young, and we use all tricks. We use an all guarantee fund, free of charge to these individuals who didn't have access to credit. So the program was so successful that we draw, some lessons. And now we have another program with the Green Climate Fund that actually does exactly the same, but for MSMEs who are in the dry corridor of Central America. So this are climate-oriented investments for agricultural sector, for a group of people that tends to migrate very fast. And so when you have a good idea, you get partners. So beyond the Green Climate Fund, now we're working with USDFC and other donors to make this program larger. So I guess to get to your question, I think there are two things that are very important. For regional projects to work, you need your hands dirty, your feet on the ground. So I think regional banks are very important, because we are there and we live there. So it's not that we will take the first plane. I come from the World Bank, so taking the plane going back to Washington was very easy. So I said, but when you live in the country, you better solve the problem because you can't live there. So in that sense, regional banks are fantastic partners for larger institutions that have more challenges getting down to the ground, to the people, and have a meaningful impact. The last thing I want to say, because I know also I talk too much, is we actually tape beneficiaries. When we shared this information with the donors, they were so impacted. A woman said, my small business was shut down because of the pandemic, because of this first loan that I ever had, a guarantee fund. I managed to rehire my old staff. There was one that even married, so she did well. But also she said, I didn't migrate because of this loan. So that tells you that some good ideas actually bring some others, and then that video called some other donors to join in. So with that said, I think regional banks are a fantastic partner to these regional projects.
Excellent example, and I think the three key takeaways for me are: number one, the right beneficiaries for impact, so it's youth entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, MSMEs. The second one was the innovative financing solution. You said, like, how can we crowd in other instruments, guarantee instruments? And the third one, of course, was the partnership, the collaboration with others to crowd them in and then to deliver on that impact. Thank you very much for that very powerful example. Piramis, Thailand is not a rich donor country, but of course you are part of the development community for more than 20 years. Maybe you just briefly tell us what NEDA's role is, and maybe you can also tell us how we can replicate one of your successful case studies in the country.
Thank you. Regarding, I think we are one of the good example for the South-South cooperation. To understand what the role of NEDA, we have to go back a little bit in time. If you know,
but not too long, please.
Not too long, yeah. If you know, in the Southeast Asian, we established what we call the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, in 1967, comprised of five countries: Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. All of them have also almost the same level of development, except Singapore, they are quite graduate. But then, in 1999 to 2000, we had admit another 4 countries, including Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. So if you look at the geographic region in Thailand, Thailand is surrounded by Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. If you look at the per capita income, Thailand, at the moment, we have $7,000 for the per capita income, while Myanmar have 1,100, and Cambodia have 1,500, and Laos have 2,500. So the difference between of development level between Thailand and surrounding countries are much different. So we already create the ASEAN Free Trade Area, which we call AFTA. So we bring down all the tariff barrier, all the trade liberalization, and also we have financial liberalization, which means all the software is in place, but the development level between the countries is still different. So they create what we call NEDA, our office in 2005. The aim is to help promote investment in these 3 or 4 countries to bring up the level of development to be the same. So we provide loans, concession loans like ADB and the World Bank. During the beginning, we get some help, a lot of help from the ADBs and also JICA to set up our office 15 years ago. And nowadays we collaborate more and more. We have annual meeting with the ADB and all other development partners like JICA and Korea and even China. And for the first few projects, one of the very important projects was the R3 project, the road project connecting Thailand, Laos, and then to China, in which we financed by ADB and Thailand and China government to that road project. Because at the beginning, our funding is very little, so we need partners to help funding this road project. And we learned a lot of experience from the ADB and our development partners. And also recently, we just have a project called the Steamboat project. It's a border checkpoint in cross-border between Thailand and Cambodia. We fund the first phase for the project by ourselves through our government budget and also a raising fund from the domestic market. But also, during the phase 2, we will get funding from JICA to work on some component in the project, which means that the collaboration between our agency is very important, and we'll scale up the project size for our recipient countries. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I think this is a crucial point, that the collaboration between the different DFIs and national development banks maybe, and the MDBs, but also other partners being in there. And I mean, we have seen so many difficulties in the past regarding the collaboration. I think I see so much progress now, how people work together and think about the right impact. We covered a couple of different elements like infrastructure, gender, youth, entrepreneurship, etc. Let's use 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 1 minute each per panelist on climate and SDGs, because also the minister, Rania, she mentioned, of course, clearly COP27. We are on our way to COP28, Dima. And we always talk about net zero, and I know that because I'm heavily involved in the creation of a net zero export credit public agency alliance at UNEP-FI together with our friends at Oxford. But I mean, the just transition is not about the highly industrialized countries. The just transition is what the developing countries need, what the LDCs need. How can they clearly mention that at COP28?
Interesting.
You have 60 seconds.
Well, obviously, I mean, there is a need for them to have an equal seat at the table and to be able to, you know, also on an evidence-based approach, express the need of their own countries. Hence, the intensive need, if you will, of capacity building for negotiation for the countries. But also to bring forward the impact on how they are impacted and how much a just transition is needed, an inclusive one that takes into account the needs of the countries, not only to mitigate, but also to adapt. I know that in previous panel, the adaptation element was mentioned. This is extremely important. Now, the access to finance is also another extremely important one, hence, the attention now is leading to COP28 on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, right? The accessibility and the abilities of the countries to do it and to be able to actually operationalize it quickly on the ground. We have seen also how much the recovery from the damage is taking a lot of time. The recent floods that happened in Pakistan, which, by the way, was a show of solidarity from the countries of the South, including a lot of those present here, to support Pakistan to recover from the floods. However, there is still a lot to do. You know, how will Pakistan adapt for a new, God forbids, any disaster that will come? It's another question. So engagement and just transition, inclusion, adaptation, easy access to finance, and hence the loss and damage fund will be hopefully an easier mechanism for the countries.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the excellent response. Inclusion, engagement, access to finance, Ferit. What can the World Bank do for that?
Look, as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a lot already, but it's very, very far away from what is needed. I believe that for the developing countries, if I can put it that way, there is a need to really scale up their engagement and their negotiation capacity. We don't want to be in a catch-up mode the way we have been in many other agendas, whether it is law of the sea, whether it and other places. We need to be out there and frankly, put the foot down, because this is a broad agenda and nobody can come out of it. This is not a zero-sum game. There is a need for everybody to gain something here. And I believe that, the developed countries, those who have now the cash, who have now the capacity, need to open up. This is one point. Second point, because you mentioned earlier at the beginning, the partnership and, what are we doing in reality on the ground? I'll give you one example, for instance, where, we are working on partnerships, on renewable, on private sector, and on regional integration. As we speak, we are finalizing a deal between Tunisia and Italy and Europe. And this is the ELMED, Electricity for the Mediterranean. This is one of those deals where replicability is the order of the day. We are, with the European Union, EBRD and others, putting about $1.2 billion on the table. The bank is putting $280 million. This is to produce renewable energy from the south of Tunisia, financed by the private sector, and going all the way through the country, all the way to Sicily, and basically selling clean energy to Italy and to Europe. This is an amazing opportunity for all of us to look at this example, try to replicate it, and try to make sure that we, put our money and our thinking where our mouth is. Because so far, there's a lot of very nice discourses, but frankly, when it comes to the reality of it, we don't see it as concrete as one would like it to be.
Concrete example, very, very clear what you said. And whenever you want to know more about that, just join Ferit during the lunch break. Talk to him and talk to the other panelists because my next question goes to Suzanne. What is your concrete examples? What is your international best practice for that question?
Absolutely, it's a very interesting and very apropos question. And some of the topics or things, you know, if I'm looking at from a private sector point of view, private sector does not like uncertainty. And this is one of the things about creating or that environment for increasing predictability. And then, you know, how do you do that? I think that one of the things that ADB is doing right now is that we're going through a time of change within the organization. So it's called a new operating model where we have the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream working together, where you have the downstream, which is private sector, influencing midstream, could be on, let's say, for example, PPAs, how you would do that, influencing the policy decisions upstream and creating those linkages under one roof. And you know, one of the other things that if you're looking concretely from the private sector, you need to look at blended finance solutions, particularly for climate. It's not going to happen to the scale if we don't have those solutions. So what we need to do is we need to look at those kinds of things which are about de-risking and bringing projects with strong, you know, social and environmental benefits to the fore. And then for us, it's about looking at that from day one when you're having those discussions with your climate or your clients. How can you actually do that? And what are the solutions that you're bringing into play? And for us, it's about bringing in partnerships. And again, we can't do this alone. So for us, it's about bringing blended finance partnerships, you know, together with the government of Japan, government of Canada, as well as our own financing partners and financing partners here, and creating new instruments for those levels of certainty, de-risking, so you can actually increase, you know, participation. I think that, you know, the deal that I talked about, Monsoon, was a perfect example of that because it brought that all together. You know, the other, I think, thing that I'd like to mention is trade finance. Trade finance and different types of instruments. I think trade finance and creating the flows and again, providing guarantees and certainties within the market, I think that, you know, creates the economic wheels, continues to focus on those areas of need in our countries in which we're working. So lots of different things, partnerships, working together, coming up with solutions to actually create those levels of certainty that the private sector needs.
Level of certainty private sector needs. Thank you. That's, I think, a very good point, Dante. And what is maybe the most interesting example of regional collaboration, but also innovative solutions people should ask you when they're able to catch you during the lunch break? What would be your advice?
Well, I think, I think the main partnership that I seek now is to work with the private sector and don't reinvent the hot water. It's already invented. So at CAVE, for example, I look at my big brother, the World Bank, and said, what has the World Bank done very well? So they created MIGA. So we are recreating the MIGA at CAVE. So now it's going to be a CAVE group with a MIGA in it, with free technical assistance from MIGA, so thank you. And so the whole idea of empowering the private sector to move in and finance the budgets of my governments actually makes absolute sense. And we do have the capability to induce governments to actually to start issuing green bonds, social bonds. So in a way, I'm doing what the World Bank is doing at the world stage, but for some limitation, capital structure, cannot do in Central America. So in a way, I think the key word for me is bring the private sector, use what has been used by other institutions, and bring it faster and sooner as you can. And if you can induce good behavior from governments in climate change, gender inclusion, do it. And we do have the capability. And God and behold, I hope to have it by the end of the year, the AMIGA agency within CAVE.
Faster, sooner, and of course, better at the end. What's the key takeaway for you, Paramis, from this discussion, from your own experience regarding our core question, regional collaboration, catalyst for scalable solutions? What are the key takeaways? What should people think about? And of course, our colleagues from OPIC Fund as well, when they leave this room after our panel discussion.
Yeah, I think the collaboration is very important. So we have to learn from each other, learn from the mistake, from what one institution have done, and what the success factor that they have done. I think we are very new to this development forum, but we can learn from ADB, the World Bank. They show us the way, and at the moment, we are now trying to focus on issuing green bonds. For the first time under my supervision. So I think next year we will issue the first green bond or social bond to get public money coming to finance such a scheme. Thank you.
Excellent. I just look at this lovely clock in front of me, and I see that we have a couple of seconds left to close this panel properly. I would love to speak for another 2 hours, to be very honest. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of you would do the same. I think, Hani, you're happy that we had an excellent panel here, and I didn't come to you and the others and look for victims for proper answers. I really would like to thank Fariat from the World Bank, Dima from the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, Piramis from NEDA, Suzanne from ADB, and of course Dante as well from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. Our questions were, how can we replicate or scale up successful development solutions? How can we pool competitive advantage? And how can we best identify which initiatives we should focus on, where and why? These were the answers. I thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of minutes or after the next panel and intervention over lunch. Thank you very much.